Well, good morning, everybody. We're not here for the beautiful weather. We're here, and it's unfortunate that we have to be here. This is the third or fourth time, just in the time that I've been in county office, that we've had to have announcements here and press conferences here to stand up for one of the most fundamental rights that every single person in this county is entitled to, and that is the right to vote. The recent actions coming out of Columbus by both the legislature, the governor signing their restrictive bill, and now Secretary Husted taking away the rights of people to vote on the Sunday before the election is absolutely unwarranted and outrageous. We have stood up against these kinds of things over and over again, and we're going to keep doing it. We view it at the county, we view it as part of our core mission. And I know the folks behind me, Senator Turner and others, have been outspoken on this, and they're here to stand with us. This is a very transparent and blatant attempt to make it more difficult, especially for lower and middle-income families and individuals to vote. They're the people that are working sometimes 2 or 3 jobs. It's not always the easiest thing for them to get to the polls. And that's not a theory. We know it because we saw that happen in previous elections. And so when early voting, whether it be on Sunday or the week before, was expanded, it worked in this county. We saw what happened in 2004 when those rules were not in effect. And you had long lines. You had people waiting sometimes till 2 and 3 in the morning to vote. It shouldn't work that way in a democracy. But now people are trying to turn back the clock, and it is absolutely outrageous. The state should have other things to do, more important things to do than try to make it tougher for people to vote. Now, we did this several times, as I mentioned. Back in 2011, we ended up taking action at the county level to try to make sure that everybody was going to get an absentee ballot. In 2012, when they made it more difficult to vote, or tried to, we were one of the folks that actually filed a brief with the court in federal court, and we ended up prevailing. And today we're going to talk about doing the exact same thing. We're going to do whatever it takes to protect the rights of people in this county to vote. So there's a few things, before I turn it over to my friends behind me, that the county is going to be able to do on its own. So let me mention a couple of those things. And these may not be the last things that we do, but a few things that we're going to do right now. First of all, we formed a volunteer legal task force with some of the best legal minds in this state, and they are going to be reviewing every single action of the legislature and the governor and the secretary of state in the last few days, and reviewing them for legal challenges, whether they're in federal court, state court, or administrative appeals. And so that process has begun. We are also looking at introducing legislation into our county council that would officially designate the protection of voter rights as a core function of county government. So that legislation is being drafted now, and I anticipate we'll be submitting that to county council, and I'll be speaking to county council members, individual members, about that today. We're also looking at the possibility of submitting an amendment on our charter, to our charter. We're going through a charter review process right now, and we're looking at putting voting rights as a core principle in the charter of Cuyahoga County, because we do have home rule powers, and one of the things that's happening is the state is stepping on home rule powers for, we think, discriminatory purposes, and we think it might strengthen our legal case if we end up having it actually in our charter. So we'll be looking at doing that as well. I've also directed my law department to begin to collect public records about who these changes would actually affect. Because let's face it, we all know who these measures are targeted at. But we're going to start collecting the data. And we're putting out public records requests, not just to the folks in the building here behind me in the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections, because we want to know exactly who was taking advantage of voting on Sunday and voting in the week before the election. And I think we're going to get some very interesting information about that. Because I think what you're going to find is that the implementation of these rules has a discriminatory effect, particularly among working people, the poor, and members of the minority community. Although it's an inconvenience to everybody, and it's in everybody's best interest that the rules stay the way that they are. But we're not just going to stop with Cuyahoga County, because this is something that does have an effect with the whole state. So we're also going to be asking for information from the Board of Elections from other urban areas, including Franklin County, Hamilton County, Montgomery County, Lucas County, and Summit County in the Akron area. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to our law director briefly. He's just going to talk about some of the technical aspects of what we're doing on behalf of the residents of this county. Majid?
Thank you very much. I think it's very critical to realize that courts do not operate in a vacuum. Courts deal with real facts that are on the ground. And here are the undisputed facts that we're dealing with. We are not talking about a state legislature, a governor, and a secretary of state coalescing to design and implement an election system for a state, that effective election system from scratch. That, in fact, already happened in 2004 after the elections debacle that happened in the general election. And we've operated under that system in 2006, in 2008, and in 2010. And even with court intervention, we were able to do that in 2012. What we're dealing with, however, and the reason we're here today, is that we have state actors who have come after the fact. We have an election system in place, and they started changing the election system to erect barriers in the way of citizens' ability to vote. And they're erecting these barriers with actual factual data in their hands. So what is the data? Forget all the, set aside all the analyses that have been done by civil rights groups, by voter advocacy groups, by even the media. Just look to some of the data that the boards of elections themselves have compiled. The Franklin County Board of Elections did an analysis of its 2008 early in-person voting. And what they found was 31% of the early in-person voting in Franklin County in 2008 was African American, even though the total votes cast by African Americans were only 21%. And in the words of the Franklin County Board of Elections, and I quote here, they've said that this has demonstrated that there's a disproportionately higher amount of African Americans that have utilized the early in-person voting. That's what the Franklin County Board of Elections have told us. So courts, when they review these things, they may be willing to defer to a state when they're designing and implementing a system from scratch, but they apply a very different level of scrutiny. They apply a much sharper lens when you're coming after the fact, armed with data like that, and you're tweaking the system to impose barriers that seem to be affecting targeted constituents within the citizenry. And that's part of what we're doing through the public records request. We're gathering that data, and we'll be able to show what that data shows and the impact of these changes. The other changes that the executive said, we obviously have the ability to do it under our home rule, and we're going to be exercising our home rule by introducing the legislation to the county council. And obviously we're going to be presenting the charter amendment to the council, and we're looking through all the legal options available with court and look what other groups are doing. And we have an outstanding legal team in place who has fought this fight before successfully numerous times, sitting to advise us and help us as we go do this. And they're doing it on a volunteer basis. They're true citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Majid Makhlouf, our very excellent law director. At this point in time, I want to introduce our state senator, who's been a very fierce advocate of this for many, many years, and tireless and passionate advocate when it comes to voter rights, and has been fighting every single one of these attempts in Columbus to try to restrict the rights of people to vote, and that is our state senator, Nina Turner. Nina?
Thank you, Executive FitzGerald. I want to thank you so much for calling us all together this morning. And we certainly have been in this fight in Cuyahoga County. And let us remind you that it is because of Cuyahoga County, the county exec, the state officials from Cuyahoga County, when we waged the fight in 2012, when the current Secretary of State decided once again to restrict the ability of boards of elections to mail out absentee ballot applications. It is because of the agreement between County Executive Ed FitzGerald, because he was fighting the fight that every single voter in the state of Ohio was mailed out an absentee ballot application. It was not out of the goodness of the heart of the current Secretary of State. As we can see, he puts out directives to restrict access to the ballot box, but it is because of the fight on the state level, the officials from Cuyahoga County on the state level partnering with the county executive to make sure that we would have the opportunity to mail out those votes, those ballots, applications. Voting is a sacred right, and no one should play around with it. And that is exactly what is happening in Columbus. It is deplorable. It is an attack against our democracy, and we cannot stand for it. When you have bills such as Senate Bill 238 that takes away Golden Week, that takes away the opportunities for folks to both register and vote at the same time. When you have bills like Senate Bill 205 that does not allow local boards of elections to mail out unsolicited ballot applications to their residents, to the people that they know, their patterns, something is wrong with that. When you have a directive that comes from the chief elections officer that does not promote voting, but actually suppresses access to the ballot box, something is wrong with that. And those of us who are elected to serve have to stand up and call it what it is. It makes no sense to suppress, regress, and oppress the access to the ballot box. When we have less hours, less people have the opportunity to vote. Cuyahoga County is the largest county in the great state of Ohio. We have 95 times the population of the smallest county, which is Benton County. So equality or uniformity for government does not mean equity for voters. We should be setting up a system that expands and protects the right to vote for voters, not making it convenient for government. We have a crisis on our hands. Right now, my office, we are writing a letter to the Department of Justice asking them to come into the state and analyze what is going on, the crimes against the voters. I want to say also that Congresswoman Marsha Fudge has already asked the Department of Justice to come in here. We want to continue to push for that because something is wrong and we need the federal government. This might not be Mississippi or Alabama, but I tell you this, we are having a pre-civil rights remix, and it is a bad remix, and we have to do something about it. The greatest equalizer that we have is one woman, one man, one vote. It is the only equalizer that we have that sets a level playing field. And to have people elected to office who should be standing up for the people, but instead are using their power to take away that access to the ballot box, something is wrong with that. It is immoral, and we have to stand up and answer for that. So again, thank you, County Executive, for setting this up. Thank you for what you're doing on the county government level. It is my hope that the other 88 or other 87 counties will take the lead of Cuyahoga County, that the county commissioners in the other counties and the county executive from Summit County will join this fight to stand up for the voters of the great state of Ohio. They deserve better than what they are getting today, and we are not going to stand idly by and allow folks to turn back the hands of time. Ohio should be the gold standard of elections.
Excellent. Excellent. At this point in time, and trust me, not everybody behind me is going to speak. But at this point in time, I want to recognize Marsha Maccabee. She's Executive Director of the Urban League of Greater Cleveland. Marsha.
Again, we want to thank our county executive for convening this today and for continuing to stand in this fight and take the leadership. You know, as I was trying to wrap my mind around why this is happening in 2014, I decided to look at other kinds of efforts where either access is being increased or decreased. And very quickly, I thought about how in the 1960s, there were not any retail stores or very few supermarkets who were open on Sundays. There also were not very many that were open on holidays. If you look at today, in 2014, not only do we have 24-hour retail establishments, we have establishments open on Sundays, and now in this decade, we even have Black Fridays and institutions who are open on Thanksgiving. So as I looked at that, I said, you know, in an economic system, everyone is fine with increasing access and increasing opportunity for everybody possible to participate. But in something as sacred as voting rights, that is not important enough to use that same standard. So I will tell you that you can depend on the fact that the Urban League of Greater Cleveland, and I will also be using my voice to talk to other urban leagues that are within this state, to take up this issue and advocate The Urban League's mission is to make sure that there was equity in every facet of life for African Americans and other minorities. This is an absolute attack on voting rights and civil rights. And the Urban League is standing strong with this coalition in Cuyahoga County and the state to raise our voice that this issue has to be addressed. Thank you.
Excellent. At this time, I want to recognize the mayor of Warrensville Heights, my friend Brad Sellers. Brad.
Thank you, County Executive. As elected officials, we should stand here today to make sure that we remove all barriers for all Ohioans, especially in Cuyahoga County, to make sure that everyone is represented equally and fairly. Voting is an essential right of every Ohioan and every American. It should not need to be protected. It should be given. As Ohioans, we play the game fairly. We play straight up. We go in, we cast our vote, and those with the majority win. Those without, they lose. This is the fairness of the system. When we start tinkering with the system to try to slide advantages one way or the other, it corrupts the system. Again, it does a disservice to all Ohioans, all Americans about the process. I'm glad to stand here today with the county executive and the state senator to talk about the needs for protection of people's rights and the ability to vote and cast their vote to make sure that their voices are always heard as we continue to ascend in this state and this county.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Marsha Maccabee from the Urban League, Senator Turner, the other activists. We have folks representing the faith community and other aspects of the community here. And I would just say, finally, that the individuals in Columbus who believe that they were going to get away with this, I believe, are sadly mistaken. They have awakened something that I don't think that they counted on. And you're just seeing the beginning of it here, and I know there's been activism all over the state, and we're just absolutely determined to use all the means at our disposal to try to turn this situation around. Any questions?
And something that Secretary Houston has kind of touted is that the voting hours that he recently set, for instance, are a result of a bipartisan compromise, and his statement included a quote from a Democratic elected official from Brown County. So what do you say in response to the suggestion that Democrats have also been a part of that?
Finding a Democrat in a state of 11 million people doesn't make something bipartisan. I mean, look, as the senator can tell you, we express ourselves, our political parties, through our elected representatives. I can find a Republican that is not voting for John Kasich. It doesn't mean that means there's a bipartisan, consensus that he shouldn't be elected either. So, look, the almost all the votes, I think Senator could correct me, I think all the votes on this were party line votes.
Yes.
There's no bipartisan consensus to get rid of voting on Sundays. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. And he knows it. He knows it. What problem is he solving by doing this? There was some outcry of people saying this is outrageous that people can vote on Sunday. We all know exactly what's happening. And by the way, there wasn't much reference to it here today, but do you think it's a coincidence that this is happening in state after state after state? And it's all happening by the Republican Party, and it's all happening by in certain states that are afraid of what the outcomes are going to be? I mean, look, you'd have to be really naive to buy into that. And I don't know anybody that really believes it. And by the way, behind the scenes, off the record, Republicans say the same thing. They say the same thing. They know exactly what's going on here. They're just willing, as Mayor Sellers said, they're willing to do whatever it takes. If that means running right over voter rights, they'll do it. You ought to be ashamed of themselves. It's outrageous. Any other questions?
Well, I want to add
Yeah, go
to
right
that.
ahead, Senator.
Mr. Husted is using that organization as a cloak for doing wrong. He needs to stand up and be a leader. The chair of the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections, Janet Carson, sent out a statement. Now, Cuyahoga County is a red county, but she is a Democrat, and she has said that she does not agree with what the Secretary of State is doing, even though her county is predominantly Republican. You know why? Because she's standing up for all the voters in Cuyahoga County, not just for blue-leaning voters, all voters. And so any attempts to scale back hours and opportunities for people to vote in this state are wrong. And the chief elections officer should be ashamed of himself. But they don't know how to be ashamed. This is strategic. This is not by accident. And it is wrong.
Any other questions?
Why not file a lawsuit at this point? Why take these steps first?
We have some time. Law director can mention this, but we have some time before the legislation becomes effective. And a good lawsuit, first of all, you collect some data. Now, some of the data has already been collected, and we want to make sure that we have the right factual basis. We want to make sure we file it in the right place, in the right court, in the right district, and we want to make sure that that's done, with all due diligence before we file. So there's several entities that are talking about filing, and I'm glad, and I think there's going to be a lot of investigation into this. I mean, as the senator mentioned, they're asking, along with Congresswoman Fudge, they're asking the Justice Department to look at it. How embarrassing is it that in this state, this is the second time in 3 years that we've had to ask the Justice Department to come in here and protect our rights? In 2014, unreal. I will say the last time that I recall that I called on the Justice Department to come in back in 2011 over the absentee ballot application, and it certainly did get the attention of the Secretary of State. I mean, I don't know how they sleep at night. I really don't.
One last question for me. Do you think that this was a deliberate attempt by the Secretary of State to suppress black voters by putting an end to souls to the polls in this election?
I don't think it was an accident, but
that's a question for him. I mean, as we know, in 2012, the Doug Price, who sits on the Franklin County Board of Election and is also the chairman of the Franklin Republican Party, said very clearly to the Dispatch that I don't believe that we should contort the urban, i.e. Reed, African-American voting machine. Just 2 weeks ago in committee, Representative Huffman, in a hypothetical situation, thinking out loud, talked about the fact that the people who only go to vote on Sundays, who may need a ride on Sundays, are those the types of people we should be making public policy for? Now go look up, this is the sentiment. So it is no accident. This is very deliberate. Let the citizens of this state decide. But that question needs to be asked to Mr. Husted. That question certainly needs to be asked for a legislature who knows they know the data. They know the facts. They know disproportionately African Americans and other people of color vote early and in person. The facts are there. So they know. That question should be asked of him. But if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it just might be a duck.
All right, thanks, folks. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming out.